All right, it's either preparing our live stream or it's live streaming now. It's hard to tell with the delay, so I'm going to go ahead and act as if we are live. And welcome. This is our live stream, or it's live streaming now. It's hard to tell with the delay, so I'm going to go ahead and act as if we are live. And welcome. This is hold on. Okay, we're definitely live, and we're already dealing with some. Hold on a second. Definitely live, and we're already dealing with some. Okay, let's see if we can get this back where we want it. Sorry about that, everybody. This is my first time broadcasting on YouTube, and I'm finding out that it is not as easy as I thought it would be. All right, so welcome. We are Rock Academy. We are a school in Asheville, North Carolina, and we are located in West Asheville, but as of late, we've been located all around North Carolina in our prospective homes, and we've been hosting these Thursday nights with different faculty and with different guests that talk about musical things and offer some musical performances. And we are very thrilled tonight. We've got Alex Travers with us. Alex, why don't you say hello and tell us a little bit about what we're going to be seeing tonight.
So I'm Alex Travers. I'm one of the violin instructors at the Academy. I teach mostly just private lessons. And I do violin. I'm classically trained, so I'm still really heavy into the classical world, but I do a lot of extended techniques, a lot of looping, a lot of jazz and rock studio work, and I'm really big on improvisation nowadays. So what you're about to see is actually the combined efforts of myself and a buddy of mine, Mike Henry Johnson, who's a sound engineer, who is my hero because I told him that I had to put together a little video for this today. And I was like, I don't want it to just be my cell phone. I want it to be good audio too. So he came over and we were both wearing masks the whole time because I think it was the first time either of us had been in close proximity to another human being this week. And he just used some microphones to get some decent audio, and I just used my cell phone, and it is just me jamming out to my loop station, improvising some loops in my living room. So yeah, it's the closest thing also to a live gig that I've had in about a month and a half now. So I'm learning. It really helped me reassess just how essential live music is. I'm really missing live gigs right now because I don't know about you, but something I'm definitely taking away from everything that's going on is that live music, like I needed to breathe. I needed to breathe. And this morning was a reminder of that, which you probably won't be able to see it on my face because it's covered during the video, but that's kind of what I'm feeling. And I think that's kind of what comes out during the performance as well. But it's a super DIY stripped down performance of me just, doing my thing. So.
Well, very cool. We're thrilled to have it. And yeah, tonight we thought we would, we've tried some live music, and that's always a little tricky. We're working it out. So to really hear what Alex is doing and see what Alex is doing, we thought like a pre-recorded show would be a little bit better. We are going to be broadcasting it via Zoom, but after tonight, after our live broadcast, it will be on YouTube, and you can go back and watch it again if you missed any part of it. I want to encourage our audience, both in the Zoom chat, our Rock Academy members are here with us. And if you guys have any questions as we're watching the video, put them in the chat, and then I'll make sure that we call on you when this is all done. We'll have a little Q&A with Alex. And if you're watching on YouTube and you want to ask Alex a question, just you can put a comment in there in the comment section, and we will we're watching that too, and we'll ask him these questions that you want to know. All right, so we're going to get this thing going, and thank you, Alex, and we'll see you here at the end of it. All right. Wow, we're back. Alex, that was amazing. Yeah, so I understand looping. At least, I dabble, but it's still always um it's just fascinating to see how what people can do with it. Do you have a method of any kind that you sort of how you approach looping or anything like that?
I do. I have certain when you do it so often, you just develop certain reflexes and kind of like these go-to formulas for building um certain loops, combining certain harmonies and layers. And there's a few main ones that I find myself going to. The first one is the most basic one, which is just feeling out a rhythm or phrase in 4/4 and 4 bars of that. Because once you do that, it's really easy if you have that solid foundation to start to do syncopations and almost like a canon where you can think less linearly with a really, really simple structure over time, because you just internalize so much of it. And then there's a few other tricks like clicking, like with the delay and hitting the loop on a syncopation when you're using the delay in order to even out the phrase, which is kind of tricky in of itself. And then adding loops within loops. Like I use two loopers primarily. I used to in that performance, and they're two separate ones. So it's really easy, for instance, to have like, for instance, you can start like a 1 bar loop and then use that to add the color and harmony and texture while starting a 4 bar loop on the second looper, playing the first looper into it. You can do that. It turns into almost arithmetic when you start to really improvise with sort of the structure and the form. So
how long how long of a loop do you usually make? You said 4 bars earlier. Do you ever do anything longer where you have to I'm thinking in particular Robert Fripp's tape loops that he did in the 80s, where he would have feet of tape. So he had several minutes before a loop would come back around. And so I don't know. Yeah. So using length and rhythm and timing, how do you kind of play with that?
Well, the longer the loop is, the risk of losing time just grows exponentially. So yeah. You almost have to feel it, and you can kind of play intentionally with losing time on longer loops. That's very fun too, and you can continue to layer onto that. It depends on how large of a sonic landscape you want to build.
And
Um,
how much of the stuff were we hearing tonight? Uh, do you kind of do you do any of it ahead of time, or is it all in real time?
well, this was filmed at 9 o'clock this morning, so it was
Well,
entirely
the
improvised.
yeah, the loops themselves. Do you do you have loops like like I have presets that I've made that are like, because certain songs I write, I'm like, well, I can't play the whole thing, so I'll do certain parts on a loop and
Mhm.
use. That's not what you were doing, but I'm just curious. Do you keep preloaded stuff, or do you try to like start from with a blank canvas when you start?
That's a good question. I try to start with a blank canvas like as much as possible. If I have a time limitation, like for instance on Instagram, and it's like I have like only so much time to grab people's attention with this, I might pre-record a loop and then like just start from that with a melody layer or something like that. That's a cool technique, but for me the process is so intrinsic to the art. Like I love the process of and creating something live and completely from scratch. Like that's where I find a lot of my value in music. So as often as I can, like I will start from scratch. I'm even when I perform looping live, if it's my stuff, like I won't show up with a pre-recorded loop. Just because I've kind of defined that as part of my take on it. There are people who do that, and that has its advantages as well, but I kind of like having that self-imposed limitation that forces me to think more creatively.
So we have a question from Taylor. What inspired you to adapt an instrument that is typically classical in such an innovative way?
um well, I was a big Reggie Watts fan, who's a comedian. You know who he is. And seeing
And
him,
a musician, right?
yeah, and then seeing him do his comedy with a loop pedal and just his voice, I was like, that's amazing. And then and then I discovered Andrew Bird, and just seeing what other people were doing with it was one factor, and realizing there's not very much to compare it to. So I think it might be worthwhile if I have the means to do this. I think this would be a good investment of my time, like from a career perspective. Also, um, when I grew up playing and even going through college for getting my performance degree, just doing classical music, I never wanted to listen to myself play. I was scared to hear myself on recordings. And um, about 4 years ago, when I really started taking violin and looping seriously in my adult career, um, I found that I was at a point where I just wanted to do everything I felt insecure about and everything I felt uncomfortable about that I knew I would get better with. So I was like, okay, I'm really scared to hear myself play. I think a loop station is like this most simple recording device you can do. um, and because you get kind of you get a very almost unfiltered uh, sound, Um, so it was a good way to start there. And then the fact that you can treat it that it's just its own instrument, it's separate from the violin. The violin is a tool for expressing honesty. Any instrument is, I believe. And in the classical world, it's like you're expressing honesty that these people experienced, oftentimes a long time ago. It's usually not your own, but you're still utilizing your skills as a tool to bring beauty into the world, usually when it's somebody else's beauty still. And with I just found that the more I got into recording myself, um it started to kind of touch on a part of me as a individual being that I hadn't really ever explored before. And I found I was not only getting an honest recording of how I sounded on the violin, but when I started to make mistakes on it, I felt like I began to just face my mistakes, and they were layered on top of each other. And I realized that out of that chaos, I was starting to discover like there is capacity for beauty and for self-discovery through that. And
Really
I was
cool.
going through that was happening in other areas of my life, but it just was the most exemplified in the art of like using a loop station, as
Yeah.
simple as it was. And
Yeah.
then it just grew from there. The violin was just the most the best option for me at the time too. you know
Yeah.
um,
Yeah. So I have a question about gear, which we always, always happens when we have events. But I want to get some other people's questions in first. Sebastian's wanting to know, what do you think about when you improvise and use the looper? That's question one. And then, do you view them separately, or do you go by feel or theory more? So sort of a two-part question there.
okay, sorry, so what was the first question again?
Uh, what do you think about when you improvise?
um so when I improvise, I'm trying to get to my goal whenever I improvise is to get to a point of flow. Um, which I want to get to a point where I'm not really thinking, I'm just being as intuitive as possible. And that's a hard place to get to, but it usually begins with, the basics like, am I playing in tune? Is my instrument in tune? Am I like playing in time with myself? Like the basic stuff there that you have to know. But after the fourth or fifth loop, by that point, like you have this harmony, and then even if the notes are wrong, you have to go with it, and you're just reacting with all these layers you've put down, and the more obstacles you're trying to dodge with each new layer, you get to a point where you're just reacting so quickly that you stop thinking about the theory or what comes next. And the goal for me is to get to a point where it's just pure intuition coming out through it. Um, and then if I think about it too much, which kind of happened in the beginning of that performance, you can kind of tell it warmed up a bit about halfway through. You can your thoughts start to trip on themselves. It's like I know for a fact my mind is like not only my greatest tool but also like my worst enemy. And yeah, so I try to get to a point where if I have a solid foundation with like the form, once I get that down, I try not to think of it and just kind of just improvise and just go with it. And oftentimes the less I think, the better I play.
Yeah,
So,
I love the idea of people have equated it to like a tightrope walk, where it's like, like you're just kind of out there and you have to kind of like balance all this stuff in your mind. It's fun, and the loop is such a fun. You said your violin is is the tool, and the loop is sort of your place to like compose. I would kind of guess. Is that how you would think of it? Sort of your
yeah, absolutely. I mean, because once you start and stop a loop, you've kind of given yourself a limitation. And it's like we were talking about those loops of tape earlier that are like what do you do with a loop that's super long? It's like you have less limitation. I find that the more limitations I have, the more creative I just have to be with it.
Yeah. Well, I think that kind of what we're seeing, like this whole performance, it's and how we're presenting it to people is that same thing. It's like very limited in what we can normally do, so you have to kind of rethink how you approach stuff, and sometimes it's great. Like tonight was really cool to experience this. Yeah, I had a question about you have modified an instrument that was not built probably to do this. So what exactly have you done to your violin to allow yourself to run it into a pedal board and loop station?
Yeah. So this is where it gets a lot of fun too, because it's very much a niche market. So first thing was actually back when I was living in Tennessee, I got a pickup installed here. So the bridge is actually the pickup, and it's a piezoelectric pickup, and that's just installed here. So it's interesting because like some people use microphones just to get a more honest sound out of the violin, but with it being a bowed instrument with the pickup right there, I find like it still sounds like an acoustic violin. And I tried playing a solid body electric violin for a while, which is a lot simpler because it's more similar to like an electronic guitar, for instance, or electric guitar. I can't believe I just called it an electronic guitar, you know.
We're with you. We're,
Yeah,
we're,
you
we're
plug
fans
it
of the
into
electronic guitar here.
Yeah, so it's just an acoustic classical violin that's great, and then had the pickup installed on it, which you can do all sorts of weird sounds that aren't supposed to sound like a violin, but starts with that. And then I actually have it running through, I got a LR Bags preamp just to soften up the tone. Because if you run it through an amplifier without a preamp, I discovered the hard way, violins very quickly sound almost like like banshees almost, which I love the sound of feedback. I really, really do. And I use it live. I love turning the amplifier up and getting the sound of feedback with a bow. It's just the coolest sound, I think. But it's not the most pleasant sound when you're not expecting it. So I have it running through.
Feedback is great when you can control it. As soon as it gets out of control,
Yeah. That's when you have to like either cut the amp or unplug it or just I don't know. So I have it running into a preamp to kind of warm up the sound and give it some more color and depth. And then I'm using a Digitech Whammy harmonizer, which let me see if I can actually. Can you hear that?
Yeah.
So the Whammy just gives it the option of like going an octave down or an octave higher, but I usually just use it an octave down to get like more of a viola or cello register. And then I have a Boss reverb pedal that I use it just to give it a little bit more space so it's not so dry. I have a delay that I sometimes use, and then that goes into the two Boss loop pedals, loop stations, and then that's going into a ABY switch so I can split the signal for surround sound, which is really fun. So I have a bass amp and usually an acoustic amp so I can kind of control like the atmosphere and make the like high-end string parts go away or make one loop go away while keeping a lower loop, which is a lot of fun. And then that ABY goes into a volume pedal, which in this case is going to a bass amp, because something about bass amps and violins, they just gel better together, especially when playing with bands. Yeah.
Cool. I think we're gonna have to have you back and just talk pedal boards one Thursday, because there's a lot to unpack there. I got a few more questions for you. Taylor asks, how does the mental anticipation differ when playing a typical live gig versus a busking gig?
A typical live gig versus a busking gig. Well, it's fun. I've busked and gigged so much that they almost feel kind of like the same.
Your regular live gig is almost a busking gig?
Almost, because a lot of the gigs I've been getting actually for like the past year, it's a lot of just like, they'd be like, hey, you do that cool stuff with the violin, do that. I don't know what it is, but do it, whatever it is. And it's almost like that's what I'm busking, but I just get to use my full pedal board. The mental anticipation with a typical live gig, if I'm playing like with a band, obviously there's like usually, like the repertoire, like prearranged music or tunes that we gotta know, standards, you gotta understand. Like I gotta play differently if I'm playing with a drummer, a guitar, and bass player versus if I'm just playing on the street. But I guess with a busking gig, I'm going mostly solo and more minimal and stripped down. So I'll oftentimes think more in the form of like classical music, or I'll prep more Bach. And improvisation is definitely less. I anticipate much less when I'm doing a busking gig, because I have ultimately more freedom to break from the form if I want to, because I have to be more personally accountable for the music I'm playing, versus like a typical live gig with other musicians where you have to be more strict to what you've agreed to do and in a more standard way of playing most of the time. So there's usually much more mental anticipation and preparation actually required for a typical live gig, I guess you would say. A busking gig, I think, is more freeing, but it's also more risky at the same time. Also, if you're busking and you're playing in public, like that's already kind of risky right there too. If you're playing on the street. But I hope that answers the question.
I think another question: how do you promote yourself as a violinist in comparison to like a band? Do you kind of go? You and I were talking about self promotion the other day, and are the struggles that, at least I think if you've ever tried to promote a band or anything really, any kind of art, it's tough. And so do you find that as a violinist, is that different than what most musicians have to deal with?
Yeah, I think, yeah, for sure. I'm not a good hype man. I cannot hype myself up. So I think it's different because the term, if I promote myself as a violinist, like that name has certain connotations with it. It's like, oh, the violinist, classical, well, they must play in a symphony. Like everyone kind of has their idea, depending on how you label yourself, as to what kind of musician you are or what kind of artist you are. And that's really hard for me, because if I have to promote myself as an artist, I almost feel like I have to objectify myself. And what you've heard me doing is a lot of improvisation and a lot of great like flow, and it's different every single time. So sometimes it's kind of, I struggle always to advertise or to promote my craft if it's going to be different every time I do it. But I definitely promote myself more as a professional violinist, fiddle player, and looper than like a singer songwriter or arranger these days. I find, yeah, I have much more success advertising, promoting myself as almost like a hired gun or a specialized, or I think of it as a skilled tradesman. I'm like a very skilled tradesman who just focuses on my craft. And I've had much fewer challenges with that than with just promoting myself as using the word artist. Mm-hmm. Especially in an age where if you promote yourself an event on Facebook or yourself on Facebook or Instagram, like you have to label yourself right away. And
yeah. I remember in the early days, there was very limited labels that you could use. And then finally they switched it where you could come up with your own label. I remember back in MySpace when everybody was using that to promote themselves. And so you had all these like crazy weird subgenres of made up styles of music people would do. And then now it's like, so back to that, here's a list, pick one of these from this list, and that's what you are.
Yeah. I kind of miss the old days where we had fewer labels, because you had to do more investigation,
Yeah. So here's a question. I don't know if it's a technical question. Julian wants to know, are bow tricks a thing, and do you know any? I have no idea what bow tricks are. So
bow tricks?
Yeah,
there's definitely a
gimmicks that might be.
Yeah, let's see. There's
like, do you want to see him like throw it up in the air, Julian? What do you want from this guy?
It depends what kind of tricks you're talking about. Like playing tricks, like technical tricks, there's stuff like ricochet bowing, which is where you just kind of watch it go.
I think that's what he was looking for. Yeah, give us some more crazy Bow tricks.
Yeah, so that's ricochet bowing, which is where you kind of use the weight of the bow to bounce around it, and it sounds really cool. Sounds very flashy. There's also chopping, which is one of the more recent violin techniques that Casey Dreesen's kind of the king of these days, and that's where you treat the violin as an accompaniment instrument, using the bow to using it as more of a percussive tool to give almost like a hi-hat and a snare and sometimes even like a kick sound to it, which is a great tool, and it sounds really cool. So, and it's kind of weird because it can sound kind of chaotic. That's a technique I'm still working on.
That's very cool.
But those are really the only tricks I do. I've tried doing tricks where you like flip the bow around through the arm and flip it upside down, and like the bow usually just goes flying across the room.
Seems like an expensive endeavor.
Yeah.
Well, I got one more question for you. Were the birds that I was hearing in the performance, were those a loop, or were there actual birds that I was,
No, those were actual birds. My neighborhood is full of birds and rabbits for some reason. I didn't know that until this whole thing happened, and I just take walks all the time. And I try to keep as many windows open as possible now, because there are just birds all the time making sounds, and I love it because, like, no matter what's going on, I'll just take a break and look out a window, and there'll be like a cardinal singing or a wren singing, and I've gotten so used to it. I just love it. And then this morning, when we were doing it, I was like, I kind of like the idea of bird sounds in the background during this. I didn't know they would be so loud until I saw the recording just now, but those were literal birds.
It was very cool. It had a layer that I was like, man, if you didn't do that intentionally, you should figure out a way to do that in the future. Ambient nature, sounds of nature.
Yeah. I mean, the violin. I mean, you can make bird sounds on just about any instrument, I think, too. So.
Well, Alex, this was great, man. I really appreciate you being here and sharing your music with us, especially since we don't get to see fresh music very often these days, and I really appreciate your time. It was great. Yeah, I got a lot of people watching and checking it out, and we appreciate you being here. And those of you watching on YouTube, thank you. We'll see you next Thursday. Those of you in Rock Academy, we'll see you Saturday. And Alex, thanks again.
Yeah, thanks for having me, man. This was a blast.
Thank you. Have a good evening.
Good night.
Okay. See you guys. All right.